Good morning, good morning, good morning. Because of the recent outbreak of the coronavirus and the resulting bans on public gatherings, many churches have begun offering video and audio worships for their members. This is new to us, and I fear that many are not approaching these forms of worship in the proper manner. Because we have not gathered together with one accord and in one place, God is still worthy of our worship. Many are not giving God the reverence that he deserves. And I want to assure our listeners that whether we're together or apart, we should be honoring God in our worship. Whether we're allowed to come to the building or if we're following the stay at home order by the government, Jesus is still worthy of our worship. Don't let Satan make you worship unacceptably. Now, by law, we cannot gather together. That's the only reason that these steps are being taken. When the danger is past and the ban has been lifted, God's people will be required once again by the writings of the Apostle Paul in Hebrews chapter 10:25 to not forsake the assembling of ourselves together. Right now, there is no assembly to forsake. However, God still deserves and expects the best in our worship. Now, I know last week I introduced the study of Hebrews chapter 11 on the giants of faith, but I felt it necessary to change directions this week so that I can make sure that our members know that when it's time to worship, that's what we're going to do. When there's singing, you should be singing along. When there's praying, you should be praying also. You should take the bread and the cup at the time directed. Our giving should be planned and provided by the various means available. Also, attention should be paid to the word as is being taught. I pray that your worship will be acceptable in God's sight. Now, when we talk about worship, let's look at Hebrews chapter 12, verse number 28 from the NIV. It reads, "Therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, let us be thankful and so worship God acceptably with reverence and awe, for our God is a consuming fire." Often when we speak of worship, we go to the 4th chapter of the Gospel of John as Jesus is talking to the woman at the well. John chapter 4, verses 19 through 24. "The woman saith unto him, Sir, I perceive that thou art a prophet. Our fathers worshipped in this mountain, and ye say that in Jerusalem is the place where men ought to worship. Jesus saith unto her, Woman, believe me, the hour cometh when ye shall neither in this mountain nor yet at Jerusalem worship the Father. Ye worship, ye know not what. We know what we worship, for salvation is of the Jews. But the hour cometh, and now is, when the true worshipers shall worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For the Father seeketh such to worship him. God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth." Now, while this passage is used generally for our worship, the immediate context speaks to the question asked by the woman about where they should worship. And it also relates directly to the apostasy of the Samaritans. You remember after the death of Solomon that the kingdom of Israel split into 10 tribes in the north and 2 tribes in the south. Rehoboam, the king in the south, over the 2 tribes commonly known as Judah, and Jeroboam was king over the 10 tribes in the north, commonly referred to as Israel. In 1 Kings chapter 12, beginning at verse number 25, "Then Jeroboam built Shechem in Mount Ephraim and dwelt there, and went out from thence and built Penuel. And Jeroboam said in his heart, now shall the kingdom return to the house of David, if this people go up to do sacrifice in the house of Jehovah at Jerusalem. Then shall the heart of this people turn again unto their Lord, even unto Rehoboam king of Judah. And they shall kill me, and go again to Rehoboam king of Judah. Whereupon the king took counsel and made 2 calves of gold, and said to them, it is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Behold thy gods, O Israel, which brought thee up out of the land of Egypt. And he set the one in Bethel, and the other put he in Dan. And this thing became a sin, for the people went to worship before the one, even unto Dan. And he made a house of high places, and made priests of the lowest of people, which were not of the sons of Levi. And Jeroboam ordained a feast in the 8th month, on the 15th day of the month, like unto the feast that is in Judah. And he offered upon the altar. So did he in Bethel, sacrificing unto the calves they had made. And he placed in Bethel the priests of the high places which he had made. All right. Jeroboam is afraid that if Israel continues to go down to Jerusalem to worship, that their heart would return to Rehoboam, the rightful king, and that he will be excluded. So he decided to keep them from going to Jerusalem. I'll set up places of worship that are more convenient for them. And one of them was in the mountain that the woman at the well was making reference to. The mountain she made reference to is Mount Gerizim, the Mount of Blessing, as found in Deuteronomy chapter 11, verse 29. So the woman told Jesus in verse 19, Sir, I perceive that thou art a prophet. Our fathers worshipped in this mountain, and ye say that in Jerusalem is the place where men ought to worship. Now she was expressing herself based on the tradition of her ancestors, not on the truth of the scriptures. It appears that God's people were more interested in the where or the place of worship than the worship itself. This was a controversy between the Samaritans and the Jews that raged for hundreds of years. So let's look at Jesus' answer to her question. Jesus said in verse 21, Jesus saith unto her, Woman, believe me, the hour cometh when ye shall neither in this mountain nor yet at Jerusalem worship the Father. Ye worship, ye know not what. But we know what we worship, for salvation is of the Jews. But the hour cometh, and now is, when the true worshipers shall worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For the Father seeketh such to worship him. God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. Verse 21, Jesus saith unto him, Woman, believe me, the hour cometh when ye shall neither in this mountain nor yet at Jerusalem worship the Father. Jesus is saying a new age is coming, the hour cometh, in which the place will be irrelevant. This age-old argument of where God is to be worshiped is going to soon be over. The hour has come, and thankfully we can worship God wherever we want to. I don't mean wherever we want to spiritually. I mean wherever we want to physically. Their position on the location was based solely on tradition and not this scripture. She says in verse 20, Our fathers worshiped in this mountain, and you say that Jerusalem is a place where men ought to be worshiped. Church, many an error has been committed based only on tradition. The Jews had scriptural basis for their location because of the temple that Solomon built for God. In 1 Kings chapter 9, God sanctified it and placed his name there. Verse number 3, And the Lord said unto him, I have heard thy prayer and thy supplication that thou hast made before me. I have hallowed this house which thou hast built, to put my name there forever, and mine eyes and my heart shall be there perpetually. Now, in verse 22 of John chapter 4, Jesus says, "Ye worship, ye know not what. We know what we worship, for salvation is of the Jews." The Gospel Advocate commentary puts it this way: "Ye worship which ye know not. We worship that which we know." It's from the Jews. Salvation is for the Jews. The Samaritans had an imperfect knowledge of God and of worship. They accepted only the first 5 books of the Old Testament. They rejected the prophets, the major prophets, the minor prophets, and they kept them from knowing many things about the nature of God and his will. Therefore, they were in error regarding not only where to worship, but also how to worship acceptably. The Fourfold Gospel Commentary says of this verse, Jesus here speaks as a Jew and draws a comparison between the intelligent worship of his people and the ignorant worship of the Samaritans. Though the Samaritans possessed the Pentateuch, they were without the revelation of God which the prophets of Israel had developed, and their worship was neither authorized nor accredited by God. Moreover, it led toward nothing, for salvation was evolved from the Jewish religion and not from that of Samaria. Because of this fact, it appears to me that you cannot know who you worship unless you learn about God from the entire Bible. The Samaritans didn't have the entire Bible, so they did not know of all the errors that Israel made, of all the punishments that God inflicted, of all the promises that Jehovah had made, or about the Christ of prophecy. They couldn't worship God properly because they had a limited knowledge of God. Verse 23 in John chapter 4, Jesus said, "But the hour cometh, and now is, when the true worshipers shall worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For the Father seeketh such to worship him." Jesus is talking about the coming kingdom. He's not talking about a location, whether in this mountain or in Jerusalem. But he's saying that God is looking for those to worship him in spirit and in truth. He draws the mind of the woman from the place of worship to the person or being that's being worshiped, and from the form to the spirit of worship. God seeks for genuine and not formal worshipers, for those who worship in truth. Adam Clarke's commentary puts this verse: "The worship of the Samaritans was a defective worship. They did not receive the prophetical writings. That of the Jews was a carnal worship, dealing only in the letter and referring to the spirit and design which were at a distance by types and ceremonies." Adam Clarke's commentary says, "The gospel of Christ showed the meaning of all these carnal ordinances and the legal sacrifices which had all their consummation in his offering of himself. Thus, a spiritual dispensation took the place of the carnal one which came before it. The preaching of the gospel allowed the true nature of God, of salvation, and of the human soul, of earthly and of heavenly things. And because of this, it is put in opposition to the defective Samaritan worship." So we see through scriptural examples that worship can be done acceptably or unacceptably. Look at Genesis chapter 4, verses 3 through 5. "And in process of time it came to pass that Cain brought of the fruit of the ground an offering unto Jehovah. And Abel, he also brought of the firstlings of his flock and of the fat thereof. And Jehovah had respect unto Abel and to his offering, but unto Cain and his offering he had not respect. And Cain was very wroth, and his countenance fell." Now, much speculation has accompanied this episode as to why one sacrifice was acceptable and one wasn't. But Paul gives us an answer to that question that can also be applied to us, and it has to do with our faith. Hebrews chapter 11, verse number 4. By faith, Abel offered unto God a more excellent sacrifice than Cain, by which he obtained witness that he was righteous, God testifying of his gifts, and by it he being dead yet speaketh. Abel was able to please God by his faith. The real lesson is that God will not accept worship that is not consistent with his demands. Genesis chapter 4, verse 7, God tells Cain, if thou doest well, shalt thou not be accepted? And if thou doest not well, sin lieth at the door. Our worship must have a spiritual approach and be consistent with the truth of the scripture. Worship is honor, reverence, homage in thought, feeling, or act paid to God and to Christ. It carries with it the idea of showing the worth of the object of our worship. It is the praise, adoration, and reverence of God, both in public and private. A celebration of the worthiness of God by which honor is given to his name. When we examine the examples of worship in Scripture, we can easily sense the awe in the believer as every capacity is focused on God and who he is. Here too, we sense the true meaning of worship as praise and adoration of God for who he is. It's not merely acts, but a mindset that accompanies the acts. With the proper mindset, it's easy to see how each act can be seen as giving honor, praise, and showing adoration to God and his son, Jesus Christ. If we remember that we're worshiping him, we are giving him worship. We're more apt to please him. When you worship, giving to God should be the main thing on your mind. God should be on your mind. Christ should be on your mind. They should be approached with reverence and awe and gratitude. And that does not come naturally or by accident. It requires a conscious effort. When you come to worship, you should come ready to give. Know this, acts can be performed and worship not be acceptable to God. Look at what Jesus says in Matthew 23, verse 23. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For ye pay tithe of mint and anise and cumin, and have omitted the weightier matters of the law, judgment, mercy, and faith. These ought ye to have done, and not to leave the other undone. Jesus showed that just strict obedience to the ritual only is not enough. Listen to what Paul tells the church at Corinth in 1 Corinthians 13, 1 and 3. Though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels and have not charity, I am become as sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal. And though I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith so that I could remove mountains and have not charity, I am nothing. And though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned and have not charity, it profiteth me nothing. Paul is telling the church at Corinth that you can do the steps, but there's a spiritual component. And I want to make sure that all of our listeners understand that while we are sheltering in place and while we are maintaining social distances and following the mandate against gathering, we want to make sure that when we worship, that we're worshiping God in spirit and in truth. And may God bless you.